What if the next medical breakthrough could change thousands of lives? Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on groundbreaking healthcare innovations. I'm your host, Jeremy Schrand, and together with CTI's leading experts, we explore the cutting edge of clinical research transforming patient care. Each episode, we dive deep into the stories behind medical advancements, featuring insights from global therapeutic experts who are literally changing how we understand and treat critical disease. From rare genetic conditions to revolutionary treatment protocols, we're not just discussing research, we're highlighting the human stories driving medical progress. Today, guest host Kristy McCay and I are diving into an incredibly rare condition, pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy, or PDE. To shed light on this often misunderstood disorder, we're joined by Anna Sowa from CurePDE, a family advocacy organization dedicated to supporting those affected. Anna has brought along two invaluable voices, Dr. Coughlin, a leading PDE researcher, and Kristy McCay, whose 2-year-old son Jackson was diagnosed with PDE at just 10 weeks old. Get ready to learn about the challenges this ultra-rare condition creates for parents, their families, and scientists searching for a cure. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Anna and Curtis and Kristy. Today we're talking about your organization, CurePDE. Can you give us a brief introduction and tell us about what you do and the ultra-rare disorder that you focus on?
Yeah, thanks for having us here, Jeremy and Christine. This is an amazing opportunity for us to speak about PDE and also about what we see as the role of collaboration between organizations like CTI and researchers and basically family advocacy organizations, which is what CurePDE is. So PDE stands for pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy. It's a really ultra-rare genetic condition. And we have one of our world-leading researchers here, Curtis, and he'll give an introduction to the condition a little later, as well as a family member. And I guess all to say that CurePDE brings together these groups of people to make meaningful progress for whatever our community of folks need. We have a small community, as most ultra-rare conditions, but we really believe that if we come together in this time, when computing and science and genetics have really advanced, that we can really make a meaningful difference. So I'll let Curtis take over and let you know a little bit more about PDE itself.
I'm Dr. Curtis Coughlin from the University of Colorado. I've been focused on pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy for a little over 15 years. And one of our goals over that decade and a half was to really bring together clinicians, scientists, patients, and caregivers as we focus on this disorder. This is something that has always been central to our work, and we've had relationships with families in the United States and around the world for that entire time. It's always been difficult to bring people together. I spent a lot of time making introductions via email for every new diagnosis. And so I'd hear from a new family in Michigan or in Europe, and I'd be like, you should talk to these other moms who have been exactly where you are. And it was always sort of piecemeal. So having a central place to go for families to talk to each other, for scientists like myself to make sure that the work we are doing is important to patients, because we feel like, why are we doing this if it's not the same thing that patients want us to be exploring, has just been really central. And we've seen such an amazing support difference for families, but also for us with CurePDE taking that lead and being the central part.
Explain PDE to us from a medical perspective.
Yeah, so the name pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy makes you think that this disease is primarily a seizure disease. And that is usually the first thing that people think about, or the way that patients are diagnosed. They usually present with seizures. That can occur anytime from a few moments after birth all the way up until your 20s. You can have your first seizure. These patients do not respond to traditional anti-seizure medications. That means that you can have a baby in the intensive care unit who is seizing, and doctors try drug after drug, and those kids continue to seize. And what's really remarkable is that what they just need a small dose of vitamin B6. We prefer pyridoxine, which is part of the name. There are a couple of other forms of B6. And most children stop seizing immediately, and most children and adults only need pyridoxine to stop their seizures. And so this is already a pretty rare presentation, pediatric seizure disorder. And then within that group of disorders, you have a very rare presentation of these kids are not going to respond to any of the medications you learned about in medical school or in residency. They really need this other vitamin. And unfortunately, some kids die during this period where no one can figure out how to treat their seizures. What makes this disease much more complicated is it's not just about the epilepsy, it's also an inborn error of metabolism. These individuals struggle to break down the amino acid lysine. It has a lot of different impacts on the body when you have too much lysine, ranging from developmental delays like difficulties with sitting up and walking, definitely some speech problems. You can end up with some other neurologic problems, from learning disabilities to some kids who are really diagnosed late in life can have pretty significant intellectual disability, meaning that they are unable to become independent adults. So now you have this ultra rare seizure disease that needs to be treated in one special way, but also needs other treatments and other specialists involved. Over the last 15 years, that's really been our focus, is A, to try to make treatments better. And we've really focused a lot on the treatment of the metabolic part of this disorder, but also just really supporting the diagnosis of this patients. As we've heard for decades of these stories of families who went days, weeks, months, sometimes years, not knowing what was causing their child's seizures, not knowing what was the underlying cause of this disease.
And we still have one more guest to introduce. Kristy, you are the mother of Jackson, who's 2 years old with PDE. I'd love to hear your story and what brought you to us today.
So, sorry, you might hear a coughing kid in the background. Jackson was diagnosed officially at 10 weeks old. We were lucky it was caught pretty early, but he went in when he was 7 days old to the hospital because he was doing really weird movements, and we thought it was something wrong with his stomach. And he ended up coding in the ER and was intubated and brought to the NICU for 2 weeks. While they were there, they gave him 1 dose of pyridoxine as well as a bunch of other seizure meds, and then the seizures stopped. And then he was discharged to follow up with neurology, and they thought it was just a weird virus because he tested positive for just like a common cold after he got intubated. So then we were at home on Keppra, one of the seizure meds, for 2 weeks, and then he started doing really weird facial movements, which we had never seen before. So I brought him back to the ER, but neurology was convinced that there was nothing wrong. So we had a little bit of a fight on our hands, and then he ended up being admitted and had a major seizure that night. So then they started him on B6, and then that's when his seizures stopped at 5 weeks old, and he hasn't had one since.
Wow, that's really amazing. How was that for you though, like navigating during that postpartum period? I know for me, I would be a crazy lady during that time. So how was that for you, as a mother of a small child, to kind of navigate that and accept that?
It was definitely pretty hard. The first few months, I didn't even want to leave the house because I was still so scared that we would be in Walmart and he would have a seizure or something like that. My mom's also a nurse, so she was a major savior for me. Like, she helped advocate in the hospital, and she knew there was something not right, which kind of after he was in the NICU, I was like, this is definitely not normal. And I was absolutely beside myself. But then when the doctors were like, no, we think it was just the cold, like, we did do genetic testing, so follow up with kind of your results and go from there. I was like, okay, great, nothing's wrong. We went home and I was quite confident for 2 weeks. And then when he started doing the facial movements, my mom was the one that was like, yeah, this is not normal. So she came back to the hospital and helped advocate for me. It was definitely scary. Something you never expect to go through. And we brought him home from the hospital completely healthy, like 24 hours after I had him. So never in my wildest dreams would I have thought anything would have been wrong. And I had a completely normal pregnancy. I never felt any, like, some people say they feel seizures in utero, and like I never felt anything abnormal. He was my second kid, so it was like completely normal pregnancy, healthy pregnancy.
When you bring a kid home, it's stressful enough, and
Right.
onto it is just unbelievable. And thankfully, you did have your mom as a nurse, but not everyone has that relative who's a nurse that can help step in and advocate for you. So
Yeah, and like my sister's an RT, so I was sending her videos too, and I was like, "Is this normal?" And she's like, "This is not normal. Like, you need," when we were in the hospital, because we were just at a loss of what to do, because neurology was like, "No, no, nothing's wrong with him." But so the nurses and on our ward couldn't really help us because we were essentially discharged, and I had refused to leave the hospital because I was like, no, there is something seriously wrong. So then his like jerking movements that he had for a couple days progressed into like the tonic-clonic seizure, which then was admitted midazolam, and then the seizure stopped. And then the next day he got pyridoxine through an IV, and he's been seizure-free ever since.
We do hear a lot of similar stories. And I can see, so I do come from a medical background. I can see it from the medical side, like there's so many syndromes, there's so many diseases out there. There's so many, even though these things are rare, when you look at it, there is a lot. So I understand, from a clinician standpoint, it's hard to educate yourself on all of these and know, how to do differential diagnosis quickly during those critical times. But maybe Curtis, you can speak to this, what is the medical community's reception of, learning about PDE? Are there any like best practices or anything that you guys have helped to kind of implement in clinic to, reduce this time of diagnosis?
Yeah, pyridoxine responsive seizures was described in the 50s. So I do think a lot of neurologists try B6. And Kristy, that's a great example of Jackson got a dose of B6. What I think people don't know, or it's not as clear, is that only about 1 out of 5 kids actually respond to that very first dose of B6. And so that's sort of been one of our big education missions, is that you need to give more than 1 dose of B6 to see if a child responds. And then there are also quite a few seizure disorders that respond to B6. And so it's not enough to stop there either. We are talking about the most common of those B6 responsive diseases and ones that have very specific treatment recommendations. So we really talk a lot about the importance of genetic testing and biochemical testing. But this is hard. And I like to tell this story because some people do consider me one of the world experts for pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy. This is something that I think about all the time. My lab thinks about all the time. And I saw a kid about 10 years ago that just had a very unusual presentation, a different family history. My mind was somewhere else, and I missed this diagnosis for months. And this is something that I think about every single day. And so it's really hard for the clinician who had 1 lecture in medical school and has never seen this before.
That's interesting. That's really sweet.
So that newborn screening is so critical. So what progress have you made in advocating for the newborn screening?
Yeah, this is something we've worked on for about 10 years. And I will say it is actually the result of the family network. We did come to the families about 2013 or 14 and said, these are the things our lab is working on. At that time, we were really focused on treatment. On average, kids with pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy, their IQ is in the 60s. And our goal was really focused on treatment approaches to improve that IQ. And I'm really excited to say that today it's almost 90 based on new therapies that we've developed. So we went to the patients, it's like, this is what we're working on. Is this what you want? And at that time, the family said, no, what we really want you to work on is newborn screening. And actually, it was a donation from families that really started our work on newborn screening. That donation helped us develop some early studies to show this could be possible. We took that data and we got funding from the University of Colorado that said, hey, this really is an appropriate way to do testing. And then from there, we got grant funding from the NIH, which really helped us push this to the next level. And 10 years later, we just published a really great paper in December showing that newborn screening for this condition is really possible, using standard newborn screening techniques that everyone in the world does. And we just recently applied to the U.S. recommended uniform screening panel for this condition to be thought for newborn screening. And it's not just us, right? It's not just the U.S. group. We really believe in collaborative science, especially for rare diseases. It's so important. So this has really been a worldwide effort for many groups coming together. All of us meet regularly, thinking about how to improve kids' and adults' lives with PDE. And so there's been initiatives for newborn screening around the world. It's easier for me to talk about stuff I've done. So I hope that doesn't sound selfish. But this year, I've been in Latin America. I've been in different countries in Europe and Canada, really just talking about how important the the newborn diagnosis and treatment is and how easy newborn screening is. So I feel like we've made a lot of scientific advances. The thing that I think is just as important, if not more important, is just the amazing advocacy from families around the world, telling their stories about the delay in diagnosis, how hard it was on them, and really advocating themselves for this is something that we want. We want to know that our kids had this disorder at birth.
Once you're kind of on the newborn screening panel, I thought maybe this is old news, but I thought that was like a state by state panel, or is it all across the U.S. once you're on the panel across the U.S.?
No, that's a great question. So there is a federally recommended panel that is strongly advocated for every state to decide to add. Although each state has the ability to make the decision about whether or not to add the condition. Some states have passed laws that said they must add any condition that the RUSP recommends, but most states make the decision based on a number of factors. Usually the biggest one is financial. And one of our scientific goals has been to try to make this screening as easy and cheap as possible. Really, we want to make it so that it seems like, why wouldn't you screen for this disease? And we really believe, based on our most recent work, that we're not really adding technical cost. There is always cost in follow-up and seeing patients post-screening, but there's no technical laboratory cost. But it is a state-by-state decision, and those decisions are different in the other countries that I've visited, who also have different advocates. They might have different rationale for adding conditions.
It's interesting.
It's amazing to hear this amount of work that you've put into this over the last 10 years. What can other advocacy groups learn from this newborn screening efforts that they've done over the past 10 years?
I will say the message that I preach and I think is true, but I'd love to hear what Kristy and Anna think about this, is that you cannot do this work in isolation, that I rely so much on the feedback from patients and families that the work we're doing is important. We try, and we could do better at this, to provide constant updates to the family on all of the research that we're doing. And so that it feels like an active two-way, we're working together towards these goals. I think that helps us center as researchers that we're doing something important. I also think it helps families know what's happening, so that if they want to advocate for their work, that it's clear that they can. And to be really frank, it also helps us as that we need samples from affected patients too. And so, there's no way that the Coughlin Lab or the International Pyridoxine-Dependent Epilepsy Consortium, which is the group worldwide of us researchers, could ever do any of this work without patients and families and without organizations like CurePDE.
I would maybe, if I may, I would add to that. Curtis has been in the PDE space so much longer than I have. I come actually from a research background. I did my PhD on a totally different rare disorder. But what I've really learned from running PDE and CurePDE, and trying to guide CurePDE, is that every group is so unique and really has their own path. And I've really come to trust that things kind of come into your life at the right time. My sister and I started CurePDE at, this time for reasons that, are also sort of, related only to us. And then also to run into Curtis, who you can tell is just so passionate and also so compassionate towards families. And he's really set us up to reach this kind of network of families. He supports us, at every step along the way. And I've learned that PDE is so unique in so many aspects that, in the rare disease community, maybe folks, can't relate to one aspect, but can relate to another aspect. But it's also kind of like that trust that, if we all just come from the right place, we will get to where we're going, which is why CurePDE keeps reaching out to organizations like you guys, because we never know where these partnerships will go. Curtis has been working very hard. We have other families who have contributed so much over their lifetime to fund newborn screening and other efforts. And there's other international researchers working on this, but I still believe that if, for example, the timing opens up other opportunities, that we all work together to kind of explore, what may be the future that none of us maybe potentially can even understand. And I think we have a great community for that. I know Kristy is always there, and the other parents as well, listening to all of our ideas. Should we try this? Should we try that? And also just really cheering the researchers on, cheering Curtis and his team on, because it means so much to us that they're working so hard every day. So that's kind of how we see it.
Yeah, and then I would say, like, from a family point of view, it's been amazing for us to have connections of people that understand the disease and what, like, our kids are going through, and having Anna and Anastasia to talk to and other families to meet. It's been an insane, especially for my mental health, like, to have other people to connect with and talk to has made a world of a difference over the last year than the first year of Jackson's life.
We work with a lot of different advocacy groups, and I like what you said, Anna, about like everyone's group is a little bit different and their needs are a little bit different. We find even within the same group, the parents' journeys change over time too. Their needs and their experiences change. So I think to Curtis's point, that messaging and that reciprocal relationship is so key. Maybe you've already said it. Maybe you already thought you kind of pounded it in, but maybe those parents weren't able to accept it because they were focused on something else at that time. So that relationship back and forth is so key, just to not make assumptions. I mean, we do that as outsiders all the time. And then once you actually hear the dialogue, it's like, oh, wow, we really misshot this. We were way off base here. So that communication and the openness of families like Kristy to offer that up, because I can imagine, Kristy, all of these conversations and these, activities like this, it brings up a lot of, memories that are really difficult. So it's really hard for the parents to be that vulnerable also. So I know that's always appreciated when we work with these groups, to have researchers that are really open to listen. Then the fact that you're actually putting into practice what they're telling you, I mean, that's such a win-win combination. It's really neat to see.
Let's talk about the collaboration a little bit. How are you collaborating with companies like CTI on gene editing technology? And we like to talk a lot about cell and gene research. It is one of our specialties here at CTI, but I'm just interested to see how you're working with companies like us and on gene editing technology.
I'll go first to introduce the idea from our perspective at CurePDE, but I'd like to give Curtis a chance to speak as well, because obviously he's been in the field kind of taking a pulse of the technology and where it's going for a long time, and has also witnessed its evolution in other organic acidurias and other conditions. I would say that we feel very lucky to be, as I mentioned at the beginning, in a time of life where we have such freedom and such opportunity to pursue different ideas. I personally feel very confident in the work that our government / NIH / other research organizations that are also funding researchers like Curtis are doing in terms of research. I feel very supported by all of that research. I also do believe in what pharmaceutical companies and biotech is doing. I know that it's an imperfect system and, it has its drawbacks, but I also feel like there's been great breakthroughs in biotechs and pharmaceuticals taking on opportunities to develop drugs for rare disease. And so to be alive in this time is amazing. But what I also feel really grateful for, and the reason we reached out to CTI, is I feel like family advocacy groups, even ones as young and I would say, as nascent as CurePDE, have the opportunity to also explore their own opportunities to make change. I guess the size of change agents, I think, is changing. It doesn't have to be a nationally funded lab. It doesn't have to be even someone who's raised Series A funding for a startup. I think there's a lot of power when families come together and connect to the right partnerships, like CTI, like other preclinical, in vitro companies, to support the work that is funded already. I think, as Curtis will say, anyone who wants to get on the bandwagon with us and help discover more for our families is always welcome. And I guess I just feel really lucky that we have the opportunity to do it at our scale. And I believe other advocacy groups do as well. And so I'll let Curtis talk about his experience.
Okay, we come at this as a rare disease researcher whose goal is to improve the lives of kids and adults with pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy. And we want to do that in any way possible. So I talked a little bit about how our strategy had been, let's try to improve the lives right now. And so we did that by using nutritional-based metabolic treatments. And it's been dramatic. That I said this earlier, that the average IQ has gone from the high 60s to almost 90. That is a real world improvement in the lives for patients. But that's hard. Like being on a metabolic diet every day. The formula doesn't taste good. Counting lysine or protein is hard. You know that your diet is different from other kids at school. So it was always our goal of what can we do today while looking to how treatment could be better in the future. I have a lot of personal experience with gene replacement therapies. I was a young graduate student in the 90s at CHOP when there was this at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, when there was a large gene replacement study for urea cycle disease. I'm still part of those urea cycle disease gene replacement studies. I've seen some great success stories and some that don't work that well. So our opinion has been to be technology agnostic and just to try to all the different ways that we may be able to improve this disorder. My colleague, who is just to me the best researcher in this field and an amazing friend, Claire van Karnebeek in the Netherlands, has been leading a research group called Charlie, where we as a group, and I'm just lucky to be part of it, we are trying many different gene and cellular therapies for this disorder. The big ones are gene replacement therapy and also using ASOs to sort of knock down parts of this disease pathway. But again, open to all kinds of ideas of how we can make these kids' lives better. I have met with and have a few contracts with pharmaceutical companies who have their own idea about how they can improve this disorder, which is amazing. All we want to do is support all of this work to figure out what are the options in the future. So whether that, and in no way do we ever feel like this is the work of the Coughlin lab or my work. This is a goal of all of us to make kids' lives better. And we really try to position ourselves in the middle of that, is who can we work with to help these families?
That's interesting to hear you say that. And I know that Jeremy's heard me say this before, but I noticed even in my professional career the last few years, I've really had a mind shift on treatment potentials and treatment opportunities, because a lot of the work that I've been a part of is for terminal pediatric disorders, which is an awful situation. But there is a whole set of rare disease that is a chronic, this is your life, this is an acceptance. So to your point, yeah, there is an option, to change your diet. That's a ton of management, a ton of family responsibility. So CTI has really the last few years kind of changed our view on this in the way that we educate even our own team members, just to keep that in your head. And that treatment might be great for someone for their whole life. That's what they're comfortable with, but there might be other options. I'm curious about what the family's kind of feedback is when you first started talking about like gene editing. Was it like, oh gosh, this is too science fiction-y, or were they like, bring it on?
So my parents are both researchers. They're microbiologists. So I grew up in a family of scientists. We talk science all the time. And so I do think sometimes it is, people talk about communication, and it's like, it really is key. But, communication to me is about creating some mutually shared reality that both sides can engage in, right? I think Curtis is just so talented at that, which is why we bring him to everything. But I guess we're shaping that right now. I do want to hear Kristy's honest feedback, as we've tried to kind of create that container of like, this is a place where we can talk about this. But I do think it's hard for families who are dealing with so much on an everyday basis to kind of plug into, this is why it took us 11 years to start CurePDE, because it took us 11 years of kind of normalizing our life around living, around the management of PDE to finally have a breath, right? And a lot of our families aren't in that space. And a lot of families just around, the country don't have that breath to take. So it is a challenge. Kristy, I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, for me, I don't really understand much medical background stuff. So it's definitely like a whole nother language. But if there's any part of like anything that could potentially help these kids, then like I'm all for it. So whether it is the gene therapy or whatever, like I think science is so cool, and it's a cool opportunity for sure to anything that can help these kids in their life, and I personally am all for it.
I think it's interesting that you say that, I don't want to repeat exactly, but that you don't know any of this medical stuff. I would probably beg to differ with your son's experience. You probably know a lot more than us on the phone here. So I think you should give yourself some credit there. It's very expansive.
Yeah. I've started to learn, but even like the metabolic side of his condition, it still confuses me. Like a month ago, he was in the hospital for a GI bug. And I was like, I understand that you don't want to have seizures, like all this, but the metabolics, his sick day formula, like all that, they have to repeat it to me quite a few times.
Well, I think there is maybe a misnomer here. Metabolic disorders, that's like a whole chemistry math class. That's not like I think that's a whole mind shift. It's like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. This is everything all this I got to figure out myself. That's a lot harder.
What do you need from organizations like CTI to help advance your mission? What can we do to help advocacy groups like CurePDE?
I guess I'll go first. I think that what I found most useful so far, and of course the journey is long, and as you say, the needs change, right? So of course, if we come to the point where we're ready for clinical trials, then I'm going to need you to be, my needs are going to change drastically. But I would say that for now, as we're exploring these options, the connections, the networking, the success stories are so vital. Hearing where other people have had success, how you've worked with folks who have done things well, who haven't done things well. And I think that comes from a commitment to mission from organizations, right? So being a partner who's committed to your mission and understands our mission, and we can align on that, really does open so many doors that again unfold in interesting ways. So while we are, for example, not ready to start on clinical trials, human clinical trials today, I think partnerships are built so many years and twists and turns away from when they actually become crucial. And so I would say that your openness to this conversation, your openness to changing your perspective on who are the groups that will need gene therapy in the future, what are the families that are thinking about it, right, is at the moment the most, I don't know, I guess valuable part of it. It almost feels like people who believe in you in a way, allow you to do more, even if they can't help you right away. And I guess that's also what we try to do for the parents in our CurePDE community, is also show them that we believe kind of in them and our cumulative power in the collaboration with Curtis and his lab. I hope we convey that. I don't know. I just think that open-mindedness, that if we all do what we're kind of like put here to do, that it's going to be great. And it means a lot when it comes from, kind of like the more biotech side of things, I guess, especially to family groups. I don't know, Curtis, what would you say?
Yeah, I think there's so much value in shared lessons learned. And it's hard in a rare disease. Like our group has been focusing on improving diagnosis, current treatment today, new treatment tomorrow, and really a lot of focus on clinical trials, which I hope we're close to, and thinking about how do we know if a drug works or a therapy works, or really focused on what primary endpoints could be and whether those how we know a drug works or primary endpoint would be accepted by the FDA. So we have lots of conversations with our FDA colleagues. We have lots of conversations with other rare disease groups to think about how did you know you had enough patients to identify that endpoint? And so it's hard to do all of those things all at once under the mission of improving kids' lives. And so for us, we were really involved in the rare disease space, and getting some of those lessons learned have really helped. Sadly, some of the failed clinical trials have probably helped us the most as we think about that was a lot of money invested, and we still don't know whether that therapy works or not. And so I think those lessons learned to us are so important, having that community, because we can't run a clinical trial of 3,000 people randomized to a treatment or not. Rare diseases are very different and require a different mindset.
I agree. Something you said earlier, Anna, about, aligned missions with groups. It's kind of like you don't know what you don't know. Like from your patient perspective, you guys might not ever know, how much you contribute to our growth and our experience and our success. So hopefully reciprocally, when you work with people like us, it can go both ways. If we have a resource, if we happen to have a lesson learned that we don't want you to go down that same pitfall, it makes sense to share it, because you guys will never really know the value that you bring to groups like us. You really prevent us from a lot of failures ourselves. And it's very, very significant from our perspective.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I guess that's another interesting place where I think we've ended up. This may be off tangent, but I do think that collaboration is different now. The value of things is shifting. Like, we're seeing value in things that previously would not have been considered valuable, but truly are, and we're able to talk about them. We may not really quite understand it yet. Families may not feel quite as empowered as they truly are yet. We haven't all really stepped into it, but I think we're on this mission. And what I always recognize is when I meet people that are sort of like on this same mission that we quite don't yet understand, but we know we're going somewhere and we can check in with each other. I always feel like I can check in with Curtis and be like, I have this idea. It's not quite formed yet. It feels right. Does it feel right? And so having a partner on multiple spaces that you can check in with and who you respect, and maybe you don't quite understand where it's all going, but you sort of know, I guess I think that's where we are in time, and why it's so interesting to approach therapies from a patient advocacy perspective these days.
We've talked a lot about community building and some of that, a little bit about patient education, but why are those so important to your efforts in moving this forward?
Well, if I can be honest with you, I would say that I was shocked at how important patient advocacy efforts are. I think, and maybe Kristy can speak to this, living with an ultra rare condition often feels like you have to do things alone, or you're doing things alone. I think a lot of times it feels even adversarial with your healthcare teams, depending on how educated they are. I think it puts you in a very guarded, defensive place sometimes, where you feel like you are responsible for this very fragile situation that you're trying to maintain. And really, as much as other people can try to understand, it often feels like they don't. And so building a community, it's interesting. It feels like you need it, but also sometimes it's kind of like, well, I've been doing this alone for, basically so long. And so when we started CurePDE, the goal really was to find a cure for PDE. And it did start with a cure for someone that, my family loves so much, And I think that Anastasia and I have just been shocked at the power of kind of opening ourselves up to the community and what that really means. As Curtis tells his history of research, it becomes so obvious, like he's been working with families for so much longer than we have. But to be honest, it was a very kind of like deep lesson of learning to trust the community in a lot of ways, and where we can go together. And I guess that community then grows because it becomes a force. Like, then you start gathering other people into your community, and eventually, who knows who will come into our community. But I can maybe let Curtis or Kristy speak as well.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, we have a really good medical team now. Like, since Jackson's diagnosis, we have a really good metabolics doctor, and she has another kid through the hospital that has PDE, and she's great. Like, when I told her I was going to the CurePDE retreat, she was like, if you find out any information, like, you can let me know and I'll look into anything. So having such a good team behind him has made such a difference. But having other moms to talk to, I find, has really made a world of a difference, because they kind of understand everything in the aspect of these kids.
I don't even think I can begin to emphasize how important this partnership is, even just from the medical side. The number of calls and emails I get from physicians who say, I did not know I should be treating the patient in this way, but my patient came in and said that they were on a webinar or went to this in-person meeting. And even though we've published 4 consensus guidelines on the treatment of PDE in the last decade, which seems like something that's easy to Google, or, gone to conference after conference to present this information, you're still missing that person who's going to have their first patient. And so I can't even begin to think of the number of kids who are treated better because their parent advocated for them. No, Dr. So and so, this is the recommended treatment. Here's the paper that was published last year. And it is so I can't even imagine how hard it is to have to be a parent, which is hard anyway. And then a parent of a kid with medical needs, which is really hard. And now you're also the expert in something that you didn't want to be the expert in, you didn't train in, and now you have to teach other people about it. It's so hard. And so having that support network is critical. Also, I don't know if people care what Dr. Curtis Coughlin says, to be honest, most of the time. They care what other families say. I use it. Like when I give talks, I love to tell patient stories, to show pictures of kids and remind them, like, this is what I'm talking about. This is the difference in the treatment. And I think that is so impactful, so much more than random laboratory data from our animal models on a slide. And so selfishly, it makes that work easier. And I get so much out of these relationships. I say this all the time that I definitely learn more about PDE from families than I would have known, even though I've seen a lot in my career. But I've only seen those patients in Colorado. But also just my whole lab says it. I do have our PhD students come to CurePDE webinars, and my lab manager is very involved, and it just invigorates everything we do. And it reminds us that we're doing this for a reason. We're doing this to help people, and it changed our entire mindset when we're in this together.
So I heard events like, webinars and retreats. Do you have like calendar events? Are these like annual things you do or kind of as needed? Or what are some of the activities that you offer for the families that are involved in CurePDE?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. We started a webinar series that we completed our first year of, and I was so proud. I was like, I can't believe we met 12 times with a group of people that we'd never met ever before in our life. So we tried to mix scientific and community and kind of like impromptu webinars. We also somehow managed to organize a family retreat last year, which was wonderful. I think we had about 10 families that came together. It was really amazing. And I know that it specifically inspired my sister, who actually started CurePDE, for like, I think it pivoted her life in what this means, actually meeting those families like Kristy and Jackson. And but on the topic of what we do, I guess some of the very rudimentary things: Facebook group, Instagram, website, webinars, and, we created a WhatsApp group for general chatting. Some of the most fun stuff, I think, that at least for me, is like merch. I don't know. I somehow feel like t-shirts bring people together. So I know that's silly, but again, it's like, I guess it's a tangible thing to remind you that you're part of something with somebody on days when maybe it's like hard to remember, or we don't have the webinar, things like that. So
What advice would you give other advocacy groups that are trying to fight for recognition and trying to get in front of doctors and get in front of patients and all those things?
I will pass it to Curtis, because I would say that we just got lucky. And again, part of our unique journey was having someone that was so well connected, but not just connected. I feel like respected and adored, across the community, that opened doors for us. But how Curtis earned all of that respect, I will let him answer.
There is a really active international group of PDE experts. I mean, this is an ultra rare disease, so we're talking like single digit number of people, but around the world who we are all working together. And I think harmonizing the fact that we all had similar goals really helped. We wanted to be on this journey together with families, at least my personal lab, that has always been our goal since we were established. I'm going to say her name, Kristy Polly, in my lab, has just really owned this and done an amazing job. And every day reminds me when we have a scientific problem or something, like, is this going to help families? Are we doing it for the right goal? What would the family say? And so that partnership, I think, really helps because scientists on their own, physicians on their own, and families on their own are all probably going to run into hurdles. But when you do it together, I feel like you can really overcome a lot of those hurdles together. Not that they're still not there and it's not frustrating. I don't understand why not everyone realizes that this disease needs to have newborn screening today and why we don't need new treatments for this today. I'm sure Kristy feels the same way, but working together means that we can do a lot more.
How do you stay? Is this all true, just 100% volunteer, or do you have options for people to sponsor you, or how does that keep your team going?
Also, probably unique to us, although who knows? Again, I think CurePDE was founded when, as a family, we decided what do we want to do kind of with this emotional and financial stability that we find ourselves in, knowing that not every family is in that position. And so we started it from self-funding, which is how we've made some initial kind of scientific investments, let's say. But I think that, again, that would have by itself run its course. And that would have by itself never really gotten us anywhere, because we do know other organizations that come at it from, this is my funds, I will invest it how I want. I believe that I can just find the cure for my kid, XYZ, right? And so it's a single point of funding leading to a single goal. But again, what we've been so incredibly overwhelmed with is how far fundraising from families has already gotten the field when we learned from Curtis, other families that have invested way before us, before Andre was even born. And that joint commitment to raising funds together for a joint cause has an even deeper meaning to it. So our fundraising is nascent for CurePDE. Curtis has had experience in it, and other families have fundraised sort of completely on their own from their own family perspective before. We've also seen the potential from other advocacy groups of how expansive fundraising can become. And I guess I think I would speak for Anastasia when I say that we are open to however it goes, to whatever we need to invest from the family foundation side, whatever families feel like, we can fundraise as a team, whatever we can get also from NIH funding for Curtis's work and other researchers. Sometimes this is the hard part of asking, well, how in the world are we going to fundraise $5 million for gene therapy, right? And it stops you. And I guess another fun aspect of the world we live in today, which is that if you know the why, the how can work itself out in really interesting ways. So I don't know. That's probably not a very tangible fundraising plan. Maybe Curtis can talk about the fundraising that families have done before us, because there has been quite a lot.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Although PDE is actually my main focus, I'm a rare disease researcher, so I sit on the scientific advisory board for quite a few rare disease groups around the country, all focused on neurometabolic diseases. So it looks different from every group. But certainly for this, it really was families who were wanting to do a 5K or some other event, or someone did a bake sale. And, at times, I remember the first one, I spent more money in flying and the hotel stay to be there at that fundraiser than the money that came in. But to me, the money actually is very helpful. Science is hard to fund. I have to keep my work moving forward. But to me, it was more seeing that the families getting together. And I think at that first fundraiser, there were 4 families. And it was just great. I had only known one of those families. And so seeing them together. So it really started very grassroots and sort of built. And it is something that I personally have knocked on the doors of philanthropists. We've had our University of Colorado team knock on doors. And sometimes that has resulted in people who were excited to donate money to research. Sometimes it didn't. But there's nothing I enjoy more than talking about this treatable disorder and how that we can do more for it. And so every opportunity is a great opportunity, whether it results in fundraising or not.
And I think just even this conversation is really infectious and really motivating around this cause. And I think a lot of the smaller groups that I've worked with, you get this sense of connection and you want to do something, but you don't know what to do. But a lot of people have money, and a lot of these small groups we've worked with just haven't asked. And fundraising is a whole career, and that's not my career, so I'm not good at it. But sometimes you just haven't asked. So what might be significant for one group, like, paying for a convention space, paying for those rooms that are thousands of dollars that build up, for a small group, that's significant. When you're working with some of these partners, that's not significant to them. So there is opportunity to say, this is a reciprocal relationship. And from you, we'd like a monetary commitment, like it does work both ways. They also offer other things, but what you think in your head is significant. Sometimes for them, it's like, oh yes, we'd love to do that. Like that's, if we can do anything, we'll do that. So just because I hear it from a lot of the smaller groups, is like.
So I have one more question before I let you guys go. What are the long-term goals for CurePDE?
Our goal is to work together to end up with an actual cure for PDE. So that is the true goal. We believe that it can happen in our lifetime at the rate of the way that technology is advancing, but can't always put a timeline on these things, on your goals, and that's okay, if we set the right things in motion. But that truly is our mission, although we don't quite exactly know how it's going to come around. In the meantime, if we can improve, I guess a cure ultimately is to improve lives, but we are now learning to understand that there's a lot of different ways that you can improve lives, and sometimes you're surprised at the thing that actually was the cure, even if it's not like a biological cure. So that's our goal. I guess I'd love to know from Kristy what, her goal is for us, or maybe even for being part of CurePDE.
Yeah, that would be like the most amazing dream for, I think, all of us would be, just a cure. Like the seizure part of the disorder, I feel like is pretty well managed on a day-to-day basis, especially for Jackson. Like I know some kids have to take seizure meds every day, but the diet portion of the disease is quite hard. I mean, I can see the benefits of doing it for him. He's progressing and he's keeping up with the peers his age, and he's walking and he's talking and he's doing amazing, but it is hard. He's only allowed like 8 grams of protein a day, so it's tricky, especially when he has an older brother who eats and he wants to eat what his older brother's eating and things like that. So, I mean, obviously, I'm so thankful that for the triple therapy that there is an option to keep these kids doing so well, but it is hard. That I would say is probably the hardest part of his disease, is weighing and measuring all of his food. And he's too young to understand why he can't eat what everyone else is eating, but he's old enough to understand that he wants to eat what everyone else is eating. So, yeah, a cure would be the dream for sure.
Our goal is to see the lives of kids and adults with PDE, improve the lives of kids and adults with PDE. And CurePDE is doing that right now. Like Kristy, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like just being part of this organization, just talking to families, that is improving the lives of families with PDE immensely so. And I think that's the reason why we drop everything to attend any in-person event, whether that's a CurePDE event or other events where families are, because we hope that families seeing that the scientists and clinicians who take care of these kids also want to be there and also want to know them helps. Like that is important. We're working on today's treatments. We want today to be easier. We want that diet to be easier. We want maybe a better B6 that you only have to take once a day, because we want today to be easier, but we also want the future to be great. And so like thinking about all of those things at the same time are important. And I don't know that we can undersell how important CurePDE and similar patient advocacy groups are right now, even though there is not a gene replacement or editing or other cellular therapy.
Oh yeah, the CurePDE Foundation has been amazing for myself, and I can probably speak on all the other families that attended even the retreat. It was just honestly like a once in a lifetime experience. It was so cool to see other kids that have the same disease as Jackson. And it was so cool to meet other parents and kind of talk on a day-to-day basis of what they do that can help their kids, or just share information, and see all these kids together running around having a great time was just amazing.
Thank you so much, Curtis, Anna, and Kristy, for joining us today and explaining how CurePDE is continuing to help move medicine forward. We are so lucky to have great partners like you to come onto the podcast and tell your story.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoy discovering how medicine is moving forward, or you are interested in how CTI could help you with clinical research, be sure to subscribe. Follow us on social media or visit our website at ctifacts.com.